Julian Carter was not the kind of man who let life happen by accident. As a renowned documentary filmmaker known for traveling across the globe to capture life-changing stories, every minute of his day was scheduled with precision. His team of assistants knew better than to allow for mistakes. So when his driver took a wrong turn on the way to the Seattle Film Festival, Julian nearly called it a disaster. Instead of waiting backstage at a luxury hotel, he found himself standing in front of a small seaside cafe with weathered wood, fogged-up windows, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Café Sol, Pastries and Memories." He meant to leave. This wasn't his kind of place. Too quaint, too slow. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the scent of cinnamon drifting in the breeze, or the warm light spilling through the window panes. Or maybe, for the first time in years, he was just tired. He told the driver to wait and stepped inside. The air inside was oddly comforting. Old wooden tables, mismatched tablecloths, soft jazz playing in the background, and children laughing in the corner. Julian chose a seat by the window, pulled out his phone, and prepared to answer a few emails. Relaxation wasn't on his schedule. But in that moment, as sunlight slanted across a steaming cup of tea and laughter echoed again, Julian felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Life sometimes happens off script. Julian was typing his third email when a burst of wild, honest laughter rang out behind him. Children's laughter. He turned. Time stopped. At a table near the center of the cafe, a woman sat with 3 young boys. But not just any woman. It was Elena Torres. She looked a little older, her long, dark brown hair now woven into a loose braid draped over one shoulder. But the way she moved, the softness in her expression, the way she tilted her head when listening, it was unmistakably her. And then he saw the children. 3 boys, each with sun-kissed skin, soft curls, and striking green eyes. The same eyes Julian saw in the mirror every morning. One was trying to balance a cookie on his nose. Another was doodling on a napkin with a crayon. The third was chattering rapidly. Something about spaceships? Elena was trying to keep up, smiling and nodding. Julian couldn't breathe. One of them looked up and laughed, and it was his laugh. Exactly his laugh, the one his mother used to point out when he was a kid and said, "You can't fake that joy." His entire body tensed. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked, trying to convince himself he was wrong. But he wasn't. There was no mistake. Those children were his. The truth hit so hard that everything else in the cafe seemed to vanish. He couldn't hear the music anymore, or the clinking of spoons against porcelain. There was only one sound left, the sound of recognition, and the vast, hollow ache of all the years he hadn't known what he'd missed. Julian couldn't look away. He stared at Elena as if she were a ghost. Some piece of his past he had tried to bury, now suddenly resurrected in front of him. 3 years ago, they'd sat on his apartment balcony, sharing cold pasta and joking about baby names for kids who didn't yet exist. Elena laughed and called Captain Cheese the worst name for a boy. Julian said if he had a daughter, he'd name her Nova, because she was the brightest light in his universe. They thought they had all the time in the world. But the next morning, she was gone. No note, no message, no goodbye. Julian thought something terrible had happened. He called her friends. No one knew. He hired people to find her. Her apartment was empty. Her phone disconnected. Bank accounts closed. She had disappeared, as if she'd never existed. And it destroyed something inside him. Something soft, something hopeful, something human. After that, Julian buried himself in his work. He won awards, climbed to the top of his field, traveled the world telling other people's stories, while quietly giving up on his own. But now, watching Elena gently help a little boy slice a donut in half, her face calm and patient, he finally understood. She hadn't just left. She vanished with everything, every dream they whispered on late nights, every possibility of mornings filled with tiny footsteps. His future was sitting at that table, and he hadn't even known. And he didn't know if he could forgive her, or if he even should. All he knew was he wasn't the same man anymore, not after seeing them, not after knowing the truth. Elena still hadn't seen him. She was wiping the youngest boy's mouth with a napkin, one hand steadying a cup of juice before it could spill. She looked tired but not worn down. There was something in her eyes, a quiet strength Julian still remembered and loved. He stood, his fist clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. She must have felt it, the weight of his stare. She turned. Their eyes met. She froze. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted like she might speak, but no sound came. Julian walked toward her. Slow, steady steps. Elena. One word. It fell from his mouth like a stone. She flinched slightly. "Julian," she whispered. Her voice was still soft, but now it carried something else. Exhaustion and guilt. "They're mine, aren't they?" he asked, eyes locked on the three children. Elena nodded. No lies, no denial. "Why?" his voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked up, her eyes lightly glassed. "Because I was scared." "Scared of what?" His voice sharpened. "That I wouldn't want them?" "No." She shook her head quickly. "Because I knew you would. I knew you'd turn your whole life upside down for them. And that terrified me." Julian froze. "I knew that if you knew, you'd do everything to be there for them, for me. But your life, your world was too big, too fast. I couldn't imagine them growing up under spotlights and cameras. I couldn't do that to them. Or to you." Julian stared at her. "You didn't give me a choice." "No," Elena exhaled. "And maybe that was wrong, but it was the only way I knew how to keep them safe and to keep myself from falling apart." Julian didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, the kids, Elena's eyes when she nodded, all the years he had missed, unknowing, absent, without a choice. The next morning, instead of heading to his meetings in Seattle, Julian sat in his car, a block away from Elena's apartment. He hadn't told her he was coming. Part of him feared she wouldn't let him see the kids, but he just needed to see them. Then the door opened. Elena stepped out in a worn canvas coat, holding the hands of two kids, the third trailing behind, wielding a stick like a sword. She spotted him almost instantly, but she didn't panic. She hesitated only a moment, then walked toward him. "We're going to the park," she said, her tone neutral, not cold, but not warm either. "If you want, you can walk with us." Julian nodded, his voice tight. "I'd like that." They walked in silence at first. The boys ran ahead, laughing, chasing seagulls. Julian watched them like they were magic, every movement surreal. When the smallest boy tripped, Elena started forward, but Julian was quicker. He knelt down, gently brushing dirt from the boy's hands. "You okay, buddy?" he asked softly. The boy looked up, bright green eyes wide. "I'm not Buddy, I'm Theo." Julian froze. Behind him, Elena offered a faint smile. "That's Theo. The one in red is Max, and the one who never stops asking why, that's Leo." Julian looked at Theo for a long second, then crouched down again. "Hi, Theo. I'm your dad." Theo tilted his head. "Really?" Julian nodded. "Yeah, really." And just like that, Theo threw his arms around Julian's neck, tight and instinctive, like he had always known. Since that day at the park, Julian started showing up every day, but never uninvited. He always texted first, never assumed, never expected, and Elena always replied, sometimes with a simple word, "Okay." He didn't bring flashy gifts or loud toys. Instead, he'd bring watercolor paints for Max, a book about planets for Leo, or just a bag of hazelnut cookies Elena used to love. No explanations, no big gestures. Elena didn't stop him, but she didn't let him in either. She watched from a distance, sometimes through the window, sometimes behind a warm mug of tea. She wasn't the same optimistic girl he remembered, but she was still the strong mother who put her children first. The kids were different. They didn't need time to adjust. They didn't ask questions like adults. They didn't need reasons. To them, Julian wasn't some guy. He was just dad, a word that came out of their mouths as naturally as if it had always been true. At first, they called him Mr. Julian, but after an afternoon of building a blanket fort out of chairs and sheets, Leo sat beside him, studied him closely, and asked quietly, "Are you really gonna be my dad?" Julian could barely breathe. He nodded, "If you want me to be." Leo didn't say anything else, but that night, when Max raised his milk cup and said, "Dad, watch out, I'm gonna spill it," Julian just stood there, stunned. No one declared anything. There was no dramatic moment like in the movies. It was just a shift. Simple, natural, complete. From that day on, Dad wasn't a title. They simply gave it to him without thinking, like it had always been his. Elena noticed. She didn't speak, but something in her gaze softened, like curtains parting slightly to let in the morning sun. Not full trust, but maybe the beginning of something that still had room to grow. One evening, after the kids had fallen asleep and the house settled into rare stillness, Elena walked into the kitchen and found Julian doing the dishes. He hadn't asked, hadn't waited for instructions, just rolled up his sleeves and started cleaning. Elena leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching him for a moment. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. Julian turned, drying his hands with a dish towel, offering a half smile. "I know, but I want to." She nodded, avoiding his eyes. "You were always good at doing what you wanted." "Not always," he said quietly. "I was good at doing what I thought I was supposed to want. There's a difference." She didn't respond right away. She looked down at the floor as if searching for answers in the worn tile. "I don't know how to trust this. Trust you. Trust any of this." Julian stepped closer, not touching her, just close enough to be fully heard. "I get it. And I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. Just let me be here. Let me earn it." She exhaled, her eyes misty under the kitchen light. "You missed everything. The first steps, the fevers, the birthdays, the nightmares at 2 a.m. Julian nodded slowly. "I know, and I'll never get that time back. But if you'll let me, I won't miss another thing." Silence followed, but it wasn't cold anymore. It was something slowly softening, quietly real. A week after that quiet evening, Elena handed Julian an envelope. No explanation, no prolonged eye contact, just a folded sheet of paper placed between 2 mugs of tea. Inside were copies of the children's birth certificates. Where the father's name had once been blank, it now read, Julian Carter. He stared at the paper for a long time, saying nothing. The black ink was crisp, but to him it seemed to tremble under the warm kitchen light. Elena whispered, her voice barely audible, "I'm ready for them to know who their father is. Legally, fully, completely." Julian nodded, his eyes burning. He didn't need thanks. He didn't need forgiveness. He just needed this. A quiet step forward, a door opening, not through words, but through trust. And to him, that was everything. Julian didn't move in. He rented a small house just 2 blocks from Elena's. Not close enough to crowd her, but close enough to show up when it mattered. He began arriving in the mornings, helping with jackets, finding sneakers, tying laces. Some days he was late because of a meeting, but he still made it in time to read a few pages before bedtime. He didn't try to become anyone. He simply showed up, every day, quietly, steadily. Elena started letting him hold pieces of their rhythm, bit by bit. She saw him mixing milk at midnight, patching toy trucks with duct tape, making smiley face sandwiches. Once, she caught him lying flat under the kitchen table, searching for a lost toy car like he was saving the world. And slowly, with every small moment, something in her began to shift. She no longer watched him like a stranger under evaluation. She looked at him like part of the house, not an intruder, but a root, something belonging here with them. And for Julian, it was no longer a question of how much time he had lost. It was, how long can I stay from here on? He wasn't trying to reclaim the past anymore. He was planting something new. One quiet Sunday morning, snow fell gently outside the window. The house smelled of cocoa and cinnamon. The three boys were curled between two grown-ups on the couch, watching cartoons with the volume low. Elena looked at Julian, who was holding Leo in his lap, nodding along to the cartoon music. He didn't speak. He was just there, present, complete, peaceful. And in that moment, she understood. He hadn't come back to fix the past. He came back to stay. No promises, no grand gestures, just choice, made again and again. Real love wasn't a dramatic return. It was a man doing dishes when no one asked. It was knowing which blanket belonged to which child, and that Leo needed 5 extra minutes of holding every night. It was reading stories until the last eyelid closed, and staying even after the lights went out. Julian wasn't a hero. He didn't come back to save anyone. He came back as a man who had learned to listen, to change, and to stay, not out of guilt, but out of love. And Elena, the woman who once leapt out of fear, looked at him now and didn't see the man who broke her heart. She saw the man who came back, not with grand gestures, but with gentle hands that stayed. This wasn't a restart. It was a new kind of love, rooted in what was lost, shaped by what was learned, and watered with quiet forgiveness.